Hey there, intrepid listeners. I'm Devin, and this is Space Mummies from Planet X. You know, the podcast about all things sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. And we're back for our thrilling conclusion to our two-parter on Isaac Asimov and the Foundation series. You know, there was just too much content to go over in a single episode. It's also a lot of dense information. Even when summarizing the books in the 7-part series, there's too much to really digest in one go. So I want to thank you for returning and helping me see this one to a close. I'm recording this episode over a week early, not that it's really going to matter to anyone listening to it either now or in the future, so it's another first for me, and a rare night recording session at that. Oh yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you to go check the Killer Voice Studios YouTube channel. Like the videos, subscribe to the channel, spread the word. The most recent video will have been, and I love the future perfect tense, one that I just uploaded about diaphragmatic breathing as it relates to voiceover, though the same information does apply to both singing and public speaking. It's hard to really show the exercises very well on video, although I did my best. It's more of a feel it rather than see it thing. But once you get the feeling down, you're golden. Go watch the video and learn how to breathe. I just saw The Woman King a few days back starring Viola Davis about the Agogie, an all-female warrior unit in the 1800s that protect their kingdom in West Africa from predations by neighboring kingdoms and the European slave trade. It was an interesting story, and a true one, with some fairly predictable beats, which feels weird to say about something historical, that had a lot of heart and decent action scenes. I'm probably going to forget I saw it pretty quickly, to be brutally honest, but there's enough good material there that I would recommend it if you're looking for something to watch. I'm still watching The Walking Dead, although I'm almost entirely caught up, and keeping current with She-Hulk, which continues to be excellent. I think I'm a few episodes behind on House of the Dragon, although I'm enjoying it, and I've barely touched Rings of Power yet. That'll probably change in the near future. I've also been playing some Octopath Traveler, the Square Enix JRPG for Nintendo Switch, for a podcast down the line. They just announced a sequel for early next year, and so far, what I've played has been really fun. I'm about 9 hours in currently. It's a gorgeous game. I'll go into more specifics in the actual episode that I record. So, back to Foundation. I feel like I should give a quick recap so we know where we're jumping back into things. Previously, on Space Mummies from Planet X, Isaac Asimov came to America as the son of Jewish immigrants and discovered a love of science fiction through sci-fi magazines. He was really smart and studied chemistry up to the doctorate level and worked as a civilian chemist in World War II. He started submitting sci-fi short stories to Astounding Science Fiction magazine, and through a combination of talent and determination, became a successful short story author. Throughout the 1940s, he submitted the stories that would later be collected as his Foundation trilogy about a first galactic empire falling apart and the group created to form the foundation of the Second Galactic Empire. They're a series of stories that tell a narrative that spans hundreds of years as this group, the Foundation, grows more powerful according to a secret plan developed by the psychohistorian Harry Seldon. The stories were collected into novels in the early 1950s, and that was seemingly it for the Foundation saga. Or was it? Okay, recap over. Let's do this. So, during this time, while he was publishing these stories in Astounding Science, Asimov was working at the Philadelphia Naval Yard and getting his PhD in chemistry, then becoming an associate professor of biochemistry at the Boston University School of Medicine. He was also, throughout this period, writing short stories about robots. Asimov wrote enough material about robots and the field of robotics, for which he coined the term, as I mentioned in part 1, to warrant another podcast episode down the line. Basically, the concept of artificial intelligence fascinated him, as well as the question of what it means to be considered human. During this time, he developed the 3 laws of robotics, which were commands hardwired into the brain of every robot that governed their behavior and prevented them from turning on their creators. Some of these stories were later published in the novel I, Robot in 1950. So following the completion of the Foundation trilogy, Asimov then wrote 2 novels about a human detective, Elijah Bailey, and his robot partner R. Daniel Oliva, the R stands for robot, who solve various murder mysteries in a whodunit style. These novels were called The Caves of Steel in 1954 and then The Naked Sun in 1957. At this point, Asimov drastically decreased his fiction writing, instead switching to writing about science, literature, religion, and history. He partially attributed this to the launch of the Russian satellite Sputnik in 1957 and the fear that America was having of falling behind in a science gap. He launched a popular column around this time covering nonfiction topics in Fantasy and Science Fiction, which is the name of a magazine, where he explained science concepts and wrote about societal issues. Periodically, these columns were collected and published as books. Basically, his science fiction career had ground to a halt. That is, until Asimov's publisher convinced him to write a sequel. So this was in 1981. 30-ish years had gone by, and during that time, the Foundation trilogy had exploded in popularity, and there was pressure from fans to write more novels set in the Foundation universe. After all, the end of Second Foundation didn't resolve the story. The Selden plan remained incomplete, and there was still room to explore new characters and new developments. So, as a result, Asimov began working on a 4th Foundation book, published in 1982, as Foundation's Edge. He followed this with a 5th sequel 4 years later called Foundation and Earth in 1986. These 2 books were set 500 years after the start of the Foundation timeline and were about a councilman from Terminus named Golan Trevize, who has this uncanny knack for knowing things based on incomplete information and making leaps in logic that inevitably lead him to the right answers. At the start of Foundation's Edge, another Selden crisis has just successfully been passed, and Trevize suspects that the plan is being followed too closely to be anything other than evidence that the Second Foundation still exists and is controlling events from behind the scenes. This suspicion is shared by the mayor of Terminus, Harla Brano, who maneuvers Trevize into exile as a cover for his real task, to search the galaxy for evidence that the Second Foundation exists. He's paired with a professor, Janov Pellerat, who has spent his career studying the myths about the origin of the human species on a single planet in the distant past called Earth. The 2 are given a state-of-the-art gravitic ship that can travel the galaxy in minutes and sent to search for Earth while in reality searching for the Second Foundation. Meanwhile, during all of this, the Second Foundation still exists, as we found out at the end of Second Foundation, on Trantor. And a speaker of the governing council, whose name is Stor Gendable, is also concerned that there may be forces at work trying to preserve the Selden plan too perfectly, and he's then sent off into space to find evidence of this thing, whatever it is out there. So Trevize and Pellerat visit a couple of planets looking for evidence of both Earth and the Second Foundation. Their search ultimately leads them to a planet called Gaia, which is, in fact, the force that has been exerting its influence in order to bring the Selden plan to fruition. Gaia is a single planetary organism. The humans who live on it, the animals, the plants, even the rocks, all share a single consciousness and memory. It also possesses mental powers, and then is revealed to be the home planet of the mule who used to be one of the humans that lives there that then went rogue. Trevize and Pellerat also meet Bliss, a woman who is a part of Gaia, and are told that Gaia had been waiting for Trevize all along. Gaia knew of Trevize's knack for making the right decision and wanted him to make a choice between either a future controlled by the machinations of the mayor of Terminus, a future under the hand of the Second Foundation, who, make no mistake, intended to be the ruling element of the Second Galactic Empire once it comes to pass, or a future where the entire galaxy would become like the planet Gaia, a single organism called Galaxia, which wouldn't happen right away. It's a process that would take thousands of years. There's a standoff in the vicinity of Gaia between Branno, backed by a Foundation fleet, Gendibal, and Trevis. Trevis then has to make a choice, and he ultimately chooses Galaxia, and Gaia then modifies the memories of Branno and Gendibal so that they both go home, each thinking they have won some kind of minor victory. Then Foundation and Earth, the next novel, picks up immediately after, with Trevis wondering if by choosing Galaxia, he made the correct choice. He feels strongly that he must complete the search for Earth because, for some reason, there must be answers there that will let him know if his decision was right. Pellerat, meanwhile, who has fallen in love with the much younger Bliss, decides to join him in the search. Bliss also accompanies Trevis as a representative of Gaia, and then the three set off into the galaxy in search of information that will lead them to Earth. They travel to Comparellan and are able to get the coordinates for 3 planets that were among the earliest settled by humans after leaving Earth, the logic being that there might still be information about Earth's location at these 3 sites. The trio then visits each site in turn. The first one is devoid of all human civilization. The second is home to fiercely isolated people who have genetically engineered themselves to be hermaphrodites and have advanced mental abilities along with numerous robot servants. The third is a dead world that provides the coordinates for all of the other spacer colony planets, but not Earth. At each of the sites, the group is nearly killed. And at the second planet, they manage to pick up a child and save it from destruction. That child's name is Phalum, and they take it with them. Trevis then uses the location data that they got off of the third world that showed where all the different spacer colonies were. He feeds that data into the computer to plot out a sphere of colony distribution, reasoning that at the center of that colony cluster must naturally be Earth. And they do manage to get pretty close. They locate Alpha Centauri and visit a planet there looking for information about the neighboring star system, which Trevis believes might be home to the planet Earth. They're nearly killed, naturally, and have to escape once again. Trevis then takes the ship to just go investigate the nearby system, which is indeed the solar system that we know. They do find Earth, but it's a radioactive mess, completely incapable of supporting life. Seems like a dead end, but then, nearly by accident, they discover that the moon has been turned into a hideout of sorts, and they encounter the robot Ardenil Oliva, who I mentioned in the robot novels, who has at this point existed for 20,000 years since the time of the detective novels and has ever since paternalistically overseen the development of humanity into a galaxy-spanning race. Trevis is convinced at this point that his choice for the development of Galaxia is correct, and reasons that there must be life outside the galaxy in other galaxies, and that at some time in the future, in the distant future, that advanced life may attack our galaxy, and at that point, our species and the galaxy must be united to repel the attack. These were the 2 novels that began to merge Asimov's major fictional series, Foundation, Empire, and Robot, into one shared universe. He did it first. A number of events are referred to that reference the Robot novels and previous works like Pebble in the Sky from 1950. And, of course, the continuity I mentioned of Ardenil Oliva, who, by the way, would then appear further in the 2 prequel novels. I'll get to those in a second. Foundation's Edge was critically well received, winning both the Hugo Award and Locus Award in 1983. Most fans seem genuinely happy with it. Foundation and Earth wasn't as highly praised by critics, although it's still regarded well. I mostly enjoy these 2 novels, though I do think the quality of the story is a huge drop-off from the original trilogy. The Selden plan is basically shoved to the side in favor of this galaxy-hopping adventure starring Trevis, Pellerat, and then later Bliss. I also think that the notion that Trevis is just right and figures things out without complete information, it just strikes me as lazy storytelling. And the idea that there are these forces at work like Gaia and Olava all manipulating events from afar simply because Trevize is so special that they need his opinion, it's just completely unbelievable. And while I can appreciate the connected mythology between his various writings, at times it does feel a little fan-servicey. I don't think a story is necessarily stronger when you explain and connect every tiny thing. And then there's Gaia, which is annoying, straight up. Especially in the first half of Foundation and Earth, it feels like every other scene is an argument, the same argument between Bliss and Trevize, where Bliss uses one analogy after another to explain how a planetary unified consciousness works, and then Trevize pokes holes at the logic of it. Every conversation starts to feel the same at one point. I did, however, enjoy the concepts that were explored regarding the development or destruction of societies under differing conditions. The search for Earth is a fun mystery for the crew to solve, and it's interesting mostly every step of the way. I did, though, miss the structure of storytelling from the trilogy, and wish I could have seen the resolution of the Selden Plan and the formation of the Second Galactic Empire, because as both of these later novels happen back to back, we don't really get that resolution. I mean, I think they end and it's still maybe 500, a little over 500 years through the 1,000 years before the formation of the Second Galactic Empire, so we never get to see it happen. So that wasn't it for the Foundation books. After this, Asimov followed up Foundation and Earth with the novel Prelude to Foundation in 1988. It was the first of two prequels set before the events of the first Foundation novel that then described the life of Harry Seldon and the events that surrounded his creation of the science of psychohistory, as well as establishing the plan for the two Foundations. The second novel, Forward the Foundation, was then released in 1993, a year after Asimov's death. At the outset of these novels, we are introduced to a young Harry Seldon having just given a very public presentation of his theories about psychohistory and the ability to predict the future based on mathematics and sociology. This attracts the attention of the Emperor and the Emperor's first minister, Edo Demerzel, who want the predictive power of psychohistory for themselves, despite Seldon's protestations that the theory is only a theory and an unworkable one at that. Then agents of the First Minister attack Seldon, who is able to defend himself rather well with the help of a chance acquaintance named Cheddar Hummin. Hummin, as it would turn out, is a reporter with deep connections throughout Trantor, and he encourages Seldon to develop psychohistory for the good of the galaxy, as the signs are all around them that the Galactic Empire, which has stood for 12,000 years by this point, is failing. Hummin then brings Seldon to Streeling University, where he will be out of the First Minister's reach, and implores him to begin working on making psychohistory a real science. Seldon then meets Dors Venabili, an associate of Hummin who Hummin tasks with protecting Seldon from harm. Seldon is then nearly abducted at one point, and they are forced to flee to a different sector, where they encounter a radically different culture and are nearly killed, then forced to flee to another sector, and so on and so on. Throughout their travels, Seldon looks for a smaller, more workable model for psychohistory than the millions of inhabited worlds of the galaxy, and eventually realizes the Trantor itself is the perfect model for his work. Seldon, over the course of this adventure, falls in love with Dors, and the two at one point pick up a street orphan named Raish, and at the end of the first novel, it is revealed that Cheddar Hummin is, in fact, First Minister Edo Demerzel. He's also Ardenil Olava, the robot that has been guiding humanity for thousands upon thousands of years. The second book is structured with time jumps similar to the original Foundation book, although not as big. First, Seldon is put in charge of the mathematics department of Streeling, and while secretly developing psychohistory, foils a plot by some revolutionaries to remove Demerzel from power. Then, Demerzel Olava voluntarily steps down and offers the Emperor a replacement First Minister, Harry Seldon. Then for about a decade, Seldon serves as First Minister to the Emperor while also working on psychohistory before the Emperor is killed during the chaos following an assassination attempt on Seldon. Next, Selden heads a psychohistory department with a full team of psychologists and mathematicians all working to advance psychohistory and turn it into a workable predictive science. And an internal plot to remove or assassinate Selden by one of the mathematicians manages to reveal Doors, who at this point is now Selden's wife. She's a robot. She successfully protects Selden, but is destroyed as a result. The final section takes place during Selden's 70s, as psychohistory by this point has become a real science, and he spends his time in planning what will eventually become the two foundations. His adoptive son, Raish, is killed, leaving him with only his granddaughter, Wanda, who he learns has mental abilities, and it's this spark that allows him to fix psychohistory and brings about the development of the second foundation of mentalists. The book then ends with Selden, alone and still working on perfecting psychohistory, dying at his desk at the university. The novels were hugely successful, and Prelude was nominated for a Locus Award. I happen to like the prequel novels much more than Foundation's Edge and Foundation and Earth. I found that they told a more focused story, one with charismatic characters and surprising developments. Similar to the latter two Foundation novels, there were points where the plot felt like it was too focused on connecting Asimov's various works, like the robot novels. Like I said before, I don't think every possible loose end needs to be tied up. It doesn't make a story stronger. The structure of Prelude as a much more of an adventure story made it the more interesting of the two novels, I thought. It lent character to the world of Trantor that was missing from the other novels in the series, and explored some of the various cultures that lived on the planet. It provided an interesting opportunity to play out numerous what-if scenarios concerning the ways that society could go in the future. Forward seemed to coast a bit on a number of the concepts developed in Prelude, and had several plot points that felt just unrealistic. For instance, it's already a stretch to imagine that Harry Selden would personally meet with the Emperor on more than one occasion, let alone that he would serve as First Minister for 10 years. Not that I would expect it, but this isn't anything that's connected to the rest of the Foundation storyline. No other novels mention anything about it. Also, for a story focused on the decades during which Selden developed psychohistory, we barely see him working at it. The various political intrigues all seem to dominate his time. Although, I guess, to be fair, how interesting would it be, watching him at a desk doing math? I also do kind of wish he left the "is Doors a robot" question way more ambiguous. It's not even the first time that Asimov tried this, as he left it an open question initially as to whether Bliss of Gaia was a robot. I'd prefer more ambiguity, less explicit reveals, please. It's also really odd that Asimov left writing these prequel novels to the very end, even though they take place chronologically before any of the others. I'm not sure they ultimately reveal anything that casts the rest of the series in a new light, so I'm not sure why he chose to write these last. I do, though, appreciate the way that it humanizes Selden, who's barely fleshed out in the other books. Asimov isn't the best at writing characters that feel three-dimensional, and although I think the writing does falter a little at times, in that respect he's much better about it than in the prequels than in any of the other Foundation books. So, like I mentioned, Forward the Foundation was released posthumously in 1993. Throughout the 80s and up until his death in 1992, Asimov was as prolific as ever. Aside from the Foundation books, he wrote 2 more robot novels, The Robots of Dawn in 1983 and then Robots and Empire in 1985. He also teamed up with Robert Silverberg to expand a few of his short stories into full-fledged novels. Isaac Asimov died April 6, 1992 from heart and kidney failure, although that doesn't appear to have been the entire story. Asimov suffered a heart attack in 1977. In 1983, he had triple bypass surgery, and it was later revealed by his widow that during this surgery he received a blood transfusion that was contaminated with HIV. So his death was most likely a result of complication from AIDS. And I did check this across a number of sources. This seems to be legit. So, several of Asimov's stories were licensed to become TV shows or films, but seemingly only a handful actually got made. There were a couple of film adaptations of his short story Nightfall, one of which was direct to DVD. You might have heard of the 1999 movie Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams. This was adapted from an Asimov story about a robot with a unique quirk that allows him to carve beautiful figurines and later intricate clocks out of wood. He gains the love and support of the family he initially serves, who then help him to change the laws that prevent robots from having rights. He pays to have himself upgraded over the course of his 200-year life, during which he naturally outlives the members of the family and the descendants of that host family. And these upgrades are experimental procedures that replace his metallic components with synthetic organic ones, all in an effort to make him a real human being. It's a very well-written short story and moving, but apparently the movie wasn't all that great. Some would even say terrible. And then, of course, there's the most famous adaptation of Asimov's work, the blockbuster I, Robot, starring Will Smith, released in 2004. It's a synthesis of various story ideas in the Asimov collection, I, Robot, which all focus on a robo-psychologist, Dr. Susan Calvin, who has to solve issues with malfunctioning robots at U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men Corporation, which is the actual company name, combined with elements of the robot novels where Elijah Baley has to solve murders where robots are in some way involved. I, Robot did well at the box office and was nominated for Best Special Effects at the Oscars. And then, Foundation finally went and got itself a proper adaptation in the form of an Apple TV Plus show. Season 1 was released in 2021, and it appears at this point a second season will come out at some point in the not-too-distant future. At least, I hope so. It's pretty good. So here's a cast list for the first season, and note that in a number of cases the show gender flips characters from the book, but I'll get into those differences in a second. So, Gal Dornick, called Gale in the show, one of the primary points of view characters, is played by Lou Lobel. Harry Seldon is played by Jared Harris, which is an excellent choice in my opinion. I love him in everything. Salvor Hardin is played by Leah Harvey. Alfred Enoch plays Raish Seldon. Demerzel is played by Laura Bim, and then the clones of Emperor Cleon II are all played by Lee Pace, Terrence Mann, and Cassian Bilton. In my opinion, it's all in all really good casting. So the first season more or less covers the events of the first Foundation book up through the first Seldon crisis that is dealt with by Salvor Hardin. It also invents a lot of material surrounding Gal Dornick, who was in the book briefly but nowhere near this extent. The journey from Trantor to Terminus, and a storyline about these three clones of Emperor Cleon II that allow them to play up the political drama a bit, while also showing how the Galactic Empire starts to break apart, even if only slightly by this point. As I mentioned, the casting gender flips several of the roles, including Gal Dornick, Salvor Hardin, and Demerzel, although technically he's a robot, not a man in the books. I think it works and makes things more interesting. The three Emperor clones, that's a complete invention for the show. But it's a clever concept that allows them to reuse the same actors for continuity, but across decades of time. It even has a moment where it introduces some human drama to the concept of being the Emperor of the Galactic Empire, and how isolating and peculiar that would be. The expanded role of Gal Dornick in the story offers ample opportunity to examine the theme of religion versus science. Dornick's home planet of Synax opposes all formal education, especially with regards to mathematics and science. I suspect there will be more of this if the show goes in the direction of the novel with the science religion established by the Foundation. Salvor Hardin is handled much differently in the show than in the novel. Here she's not the mayor of Terminus, as in the book, but the warden, a sort of protector. At the end of the season, they tease having her possibly run for mayor and then go a completely different way with it. Then there's the bombings at the beginning of the show on Trantor by separatist elements of Anacreon and Thespis, and the subsequent retaliation strikes on those worlds. That's all an invention of the show. And then again, there's Gale's journey, falling in love with Raish, having a child, jumping forward in time through cryosleep and then returning to Synax. None of it's in the book. Generally, the show seems to have received a lot of critical praise. It's got 71% on Rotten Tomatoes. Most critics seem to think that the changes that the show makes to the notoriously unfilmable story are for the better and add much needed depth and drama to the characters and story. I do agree with this. I kind of wish things happened a little faster in the back half of the season, though. I was kind of over the drama with the Anacreons and the captured warship versus Hardin and the Foundation at a certain point. Surprisingly, though, I was really into the Emperor clone storyline. I found myself wanting to spend more time focused there than on the actual Foundation stuff. I do appreciate the depth that they added to Gale's backstory, but I felt it was getting to be a bit much by the end. I think it started to lose direction and focus, maybe somewhat. Did we really need her to return to Synax, for example? It was a decent first season, though. I'm really looking forward to season 2. So, to return to the thread from the beginning of the first episode, this would be. Isaac Asimov is heralded as a master of the genre, for good reason. Star Wars, Star Trek, Dune, countless other properties all have their roots in the Foundation series. The robot stories pioneer concepts surrounding AI and ethics, and those are reflected in movies like Blade Runner and Ex Machina. It's exceedingly rare to have such a prolific writer like Asimov also be a polymath, at least conversant, anyway, in many fields of study. On top of which, for him to abruptly drop science fiction, writing for 30-ish years before returning to it at the end of his career, it's completely unheard of. Considering all he accomplished, everything he wrote, it's no wonder that Asimov is regarded so highly. Where would science fiction be without him? I mean, I'd almost consider him foundational. Sorry, not sorry, I had to. And that's Space Mummies for this episode. I really want to thank you for sticking with it. I know this was all a lot of information. I always want to ask that you follow me on social media. I'm at Killer Voice Guy and at Space Mummies for my personal account and then the podcast. And then, like I said earlier, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Maybe even rate this podcast 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Let's go crazy. Why not, right? I've got so many interesting topics on the way. Also, it's now October, the spooky month. I love horror and the whole Halloween aesthetic, so the final episode of October is going to be horror-themed. So grab your Shatner mask and butcher knife, because the next episode is on the movie Halloween Ends, which I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, they've made how many of those? See you next time.